Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. You're going to want to stay tuned for the show today because I've got Rick Renner joining me to talk about his new book, and it's fascinating. Also, in the subscriber-only portion at the end of the show, I'm talking to Brian Schrauger, our correspondent in Israel, and we're talking about the 6 Israeli hostages, Hamas hostages, that were just murdered, including an Israeli American. It has caused upheaval politically in Israel, a firestorm of controversy around the world, and it just makes a bad situation even worse. We're going to be talking about what's happening right now in Israel regarding those things. And I'm going to be introducing Rick Renner here in just a minute. Before I do that, let me talk about our Tipping Point Conference just coming up in just a few weeks on September 20th and 21st at Fellowship Church. If you haven't gotten your tickets to attend in person or for the live stream, go to conference.endtimes.com right now. We have a great lineup of top prophecy teachers in the world. I'll be bringing a keynote message on Friday night, and we're going to have a time of corporate prayer to end Friday night as we pray together for America, our elections, Israel, and everyone who's attending or watching online. We're going to have a special time of prayer for you. You know, we just need to come together right now and pray for America, pray for the soul of America, but also pray for these critical elections that are happening. We need to be praying for the nation of Israel like never before. And I know everyone that's coming there, you've got issues in your own life. People watching online, you've got issues in your lives, and corporate prayer is powerful. There's something that happens when the God's people come together and we pray. And you know something, there is so much tension and stress in people's lives right now concerning what's happening in the world, what's occurring in Israel, the elections, all those kinds of things. And rather than worry about it or just talk about it, we're going to come together and we're going to trust God. The last 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the service on Friday night, beginning our conference, we're going to have a time of prayer. This is an opportunity to be thousands of people. We'll have probably around 2,500 people in person there, as well as, you know, a lot of people watching online. And so we're all going to come together. We're going to join our faith and trust God for miracles in America and Israel, and also in each one of our lives. I'm going to be praying for God to do a miracle in your life, and I'm going to be leading that time of prayer. It's going to be a powerful time, and I hope you'll go right now to conference.endtimes.com and get your tickets. And by the way, we have speakers all day Saturday also, top speakers, Jonathan Cahn, Max Lucado, Ed Young, Billy Crone, Mark Hitchcock, Lee Cummings. It's going to be a powerful day. Plus we have our panel at the end of that day, Saturday, where we answer questions from those who are attending and from people watching online. So it's going to be a great time. Right now, I want to introduce a very special guest who's been on the show before. Rick Renner is a highly respected Bible teacher and leader in the international Christian community. He's the author of a long list of books that have sold millions of copies around the world in many languages. His understanding of the Greek language and biblical history opens up the scriptures in a unique way. Rick is the overseer of the Good News Association of Churches. He's the founder of the Moscow Good News Church, and he's also the president of the Good News Channel, the largest Russian-speaking Christian satellite network in the world. He's joining me today to talk about his new book. This is it right here. It's Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood. The subtitle is How the Events of Noah's Ark and the Flood are Relevant to the End of the Age. This is a fascinating book, and I can't wait to talk to Rick about it. Rick, thank you for joining me today.
I'm so glad to be with you.
You're one of my favorite Bible teachers in the world. Now, Karen isn't here today, but she loves you guys.
Well, tell her I said thank you.
I will do that. We've been following you for many, many years. Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, in the World Before the Flood. It's a fascinating book, and I want everybody to see how thick this is. It is so well researched, lots of pictures and all kinds of charts and things in here. I loved reading this book, and so thanks for writing it first.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you.
And so why did you write the book? I know you said in your book that you wanted to write it for a long time. Why did you write it now?
Well, but probably 20 years ago, I saw a video that showed what was reputedly the ruins of Noah's Ark, and I was a real skeptic. I did not believe it. So I decided to study it, and I studied and studied and studied and became convinced that it really might be the ruins of Noah's Ark. So I found who was the #1 Ark researcher still alive in the world today, and I began to develop a relationship with him and made an appointment, flew to the mountains of Ararat with my whole team, And Jimmy, I was quite surprised. I really believe the ruins of Noah's Ark are laying in the lower mountains of Ararat. Now, they're not on Mount Ararat.
Right.
And the Bible doesn't say that.
Right.
It says it came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. And there's a lower mountain which is called Mount Judy. And on the lower part of that mountain really is a huge ship-shaped object which is exactly 300 cubits long. And when I went there and really examined it, and the best way to see it is from the view of a drone, because when you see the drone footage, you have no doubt this is a ship in the mountains of Ararat.
How would you get a ship up in the mountains?
Well, and I said to the Ark researcher, are you sure it's Noah's Ark? And he said, well, do you know any other Ark that should be in the mountains of Ararat?
Yeah.
But you know, we've crawled all over it. And if you go down in the valley below, there are massive drogue stones. Do you know what a drogue stone is?
No.
Well, it looks like an anchor. But these were the stones which were hung from the sides of a ship. And they found stones like this in the Mediterranean, the
Really?
Nile. But these are massive. And they have found 26 of them.
Good.
And if you follow the route of those stones, you can see that as the boat began to slow down, Noah and his boys begin to cut those stones. And you can follow them almost like breadcrumbs exactly to see how the ship turned and went up into what today is called Mount Judy, which is right on the border of Iran. In fact, from where the Ark is, you can just look right up at the watchtowers, the guard towers that guard the border between Iran and Turkey.
Wow.
And in fact, if you go to the top, which in ancient times was called the place of the landing, isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
And if you film with your cameras going in that direction, those guards will point their guns at you to tell you to turn your cameras around.
I'm sure glad the Ark's on this side and not the other side.
Yeah, it's right on this side.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. So when I went there with my team, I said, you know what? It's not enough just to film programs about this. I need to write a book about this. Why did God send the flood? What was it really about? And wow, when you look at the first 10 chapters of the book of Genesis, those chapters are amazing. Amazing.
It really sets up the rest of the Bible.
It does.
And we're talking, this show, by the way, is not about Noah's Ark. It begins there, but this is about, really, the Bible starts with Genesis 1 through 10, and the giants were on the earth.
They were.
And the flood came to wipe them out and everything. But the documentation of Noah's Ark is very important.
It is.
Because if you think that the Bible is just a storybook, as some do, archaeology proves the Bible. And this is an example. You've been there.
I have. But if it turns out that that is not Noah's Ark, it doesn't change one word I wrote in this book.
Exactly.
Because everything in this book is, it's biblically based.
So very, very well researched. And so you talk about how many people were on the earth at the time of the flood. How many people do you think were on the earth?
At least several million. You know, Jimmy, in Matthew 24:37, Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah. And when you read that in the Greek text, as it was is the Greek word husper. And it means exactly, precisely as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days before the coming of the Son of Man. So Jesus was prophesying that whatever was happening in the world before the flood is going to be replicated at the end of the age. So if we want to know what's going to happen between now and the end of the age, we have to turn around.
Yes.
To see what was happening before the flood. Well, that really piqued my interest. So I began to dive into the Old Testament, especially Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, where it talks about the sons of God that came into the earth, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and took them, it says wives, but actually took women to mate with.
Right.
And this is a reference to the watchers, who were angels,
Right.
who God in His love set in the earth to watch over fallen man. And those watchers did the unthinkable. They violated the boundaries which God gave them, descended into the atmosphere. And you can imagine when those celestial beings came into the earth, it must have looked like a pantheon of the gods.
Absolutely.
Had come into the earth's atmosphere. Yeah. And the people availed themselves. And by the way, that is the root of all mythology.
That's right.
It all starts in
Absolutely.
Genesis chapter 6.
And you go back into mythology, and there was a basis of reality in that. In fact, Genesis 6 says these were the men of renown.
That's right.
There were giants on the earth in those days. These are the men of renown. And the interesting thing about Genesis 6 is there's no commentary. And so Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. There's no commentary. And one of the commentaries I read about that said there's no commentary because he assumed everybody knew what he was talking about. In other words, he didn't have to explain it.
It was well known.
It was well known.
Yeah, it's quite shocking to me. You know, if you look at mythology around the world, they may have different names for their gods, but it's all the same bare bones of the same story.
Right.
And so it all goes back to Genesis chapter 6, when these angels descended into the earth. And you know what? Jude writes about it. Peter writes about it.
Does.
And they write real vividly about it.
Yes.
And what really shocked me is that Jude quotes from the book of Enoch.
Yes,
well, I had never taken the book of Enoch seriously because it's an extra biblical book.
Right.
And in fact, people who told me they were reading the book of Enoch, I would say, oh, don't waste your time on that. But you know what? The first 36 chapters of the book of Enoch are very, very old. And there are scholars now who believe those 36 chapters predate the flood.
Really?
And those chapters, they're not biblical, but they are commentary on what was going on in the world before the flood. When these angels descended into the atmosphere, they began to have sex with women. The women became impregnated and gave birth to giants, and that's the word Nephilim, from the word Nephal. It describes those that are fallen. It could also describe what they did to people. They fell on human beings. And some scholars say that it described the human response to the giants. People collapsed. They fell when they saw them because they felt like they were grasshoppers in their sight.
Yeah.
These were massive, massive beings.
Yeah.
And the book of Enoch, parts of it, were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, along with another book called the Book of the Giants.
Wow.
Well, that's another book I didn't take serious, but I was wrong. It is a very serious ancient document which describes the behavior of the giants. And the giants were cannibals. They ate flesh, they drank blood, and that explains why. This weird rule that God gave to Noah when they came off the ark. Of all the laws God could have given, God's first law was no more drinking of blood.
Okay, so on the History Channel, William Shatner,
Star Trek. Well, he looks good for his age.
Well, he's in his 90s.
It's
He really
amazing.
does.
It's amazing.
He was narrating a story about Arizona. Red-headed giants.
I've read about it.
Arizona, they were cannibals.
In that cave.
In the cave. And the Indians, they were cannibals, and the Indians came against the giants and drove them into this cave and burned them there, and the cave still has all the burn marks on it. And so the Nephilim that you're referring to, the cannibals, is they spread out on the earth.
They did.
And so there are giant accounts. First of all, there are global flood accounts all over the world.
There are 270.
Oh my gosh. So, and then there are giant accounts all over the world.
There are.
Yeah. And so this is not something that's not documented. This is documented very, very well. But these were bad people. And the book of Enoch, and I've read the book of Enoch. Now there's a second, third book of Enoch that are not respected.
That's correct.
Okay, but the first book is. I read the book of Enoch.
Right.
It was written to Jews living in the end times.
That's right.
And even in Jude, when he references Enoch, it's talking about the Lord will come with 10,000 of his saints. And so again, it's an end time reference. And so Enoch, I believe, is not inspired. It's not biblical.
It is not.
But it's historical.
I view it as commentary.
Right.
And during the intertestamental period between the Old and the New Testament, it was very, very popular. And obviously Jesus' family was reading it because Jude was the half-brother of Jesus.
Yeah.
He refers to it. I mean, so I decided, you know what, if Jesus' brother was quoting the book of Enoch, maybe I need to go back and read those first 36 chapters, which are the oldest part of the book. But you know, Jimmy, when you read Genesis chapter 5, it gives all the forefathers of Noah.
Right.
And it begins with Jared. Well, the name Jared was a prophetic name. It means they shall come down. And his name marked the moment when it seems like these angels rebelled against the authority of God and begin to come down into the earth.
Wow.
And from that point forward, all of those names of Noah's forefathers, they all have significant meaning. You know, you come to Enoch, and the name Enoch means to teach or to correct. And if you read the earliest parts of Enoch, he tried to bring a correction to these angels and what they were doing.
Yeah.
Then he gave birth to a son whose name was Methuselah. And Methuselah's name means when he dies, then it shall come. That's the judgment.
So Methuselah, when he died, the flood came.
It came right after that.
Yeah.
He had a son whose name was Lamech. It's where you get the word lamentation. So it seems that the very apex of this nefarious event took place during his time. And he had a son whose name was Noah, which means to bring rest or to bring relief. And something that just really blessed me was Hebrews 11:7 says that Noah being warned of God. Well, people think that Noah just himself had this revelation from God, but in fact, God had been speaking for generations. The judgment was coming. It started back in the time of his great-great-great-grandfather Jared. And that revelation had been passed from generation to generation to generation. So Noah didn't just wake up and get a word from God by himself. He had been told from his forefathers, there's a time when this thing's going to end. And the reason it blessed me was because it made me think about our responsibility to pass the word of God from one generation to another generation.
That's right.
Noah had ears to hear because his heart had been prepared by his forefathers. I think it's amazing.
I think it's absolutely amazing. Now, Noah, and you talk about Noah was 500 years old when he received the instructions to build
That's
the ark.
right, 500 years old.
And so he had sons after that?
Well, the Bible says his first son was born about the time that he was 500.
Right.
And he built for 100 years.
Built the ark for 100 years.
Now, God gave a warning that he was going to give mankind 120 years to self-correct.
Let's talk about that. Because now, a lot of people are confused about that, because a lot of people believe when God said, I won't strive with men forever.
Right.
The days of their lives be 120 years.
Right.
Some people believe that's a generation in the Bible. You believe, and you document that in your book, that this is from the time that God proclaimed judgment until the time the flood came, there's 120 years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So God said, I'm going to give 120 years. I'm not going to tolerate this mess forever.
Right.
I mean, think about it. God created the world to be a good place. And now all these horrible violations and aberrations and hybrid creatures are roaming the earth. And you know, Jimmy, when I wrote this book, I had a doctor who is a believer who read part of it, and he got really offended with me. And in fact, he accused me of being a blasphemer. I said, a blasphemer? He said, yeah. He said, the Bible clearly says that everything produces after its own kind. How can an angel and a woman produce a giant? Well, that's a very good question. God's intention was that everything produced after its own kind. But in some way which we do not understand, these angels violated that barrier. Right. They violated it. And you know what? Rules are being violated in laboratories all over the world today.
That's exactly right.
They're creating all kinds of things God never intended to be created. And so that's what happened before the flood. And through these giants, horrible violence and corruption began to fill the earth. And if you read the book of the giants, it says that the giants, just like the angels defiled the women, the giants began to defile animals. And the result was the animals gave birth to monstrous beasts. And that explains why you find the same beasts in mythology all over the world. Cultures that never knew each other, never met each other, but they all tell the same stories about the same kinds of beasts.
Like what kind of beasts?
Well, like the centaur. I mean, these things were real creatures. You know what? Sometimes people think, well, those old pagan mythology, they just had overactive imaginations. These were the people who created geometry, right, archaeology. They built the pyramids, which we still to this day don't know how to build. These were brilliant, brilliant people who did not have just overactive imaginations. Yeah. And though some of the stories were absolutely legendized, if you go back to the beginning, there was an echo of a memory when they all could remember giants and beasts that were roaming the earth in the days before the flood. And God sent the flood not to destroy. And in fact, the word destroy, which is used in Genesis chapter 6, really is the word to purge. It was a purging operation to clean things up.
Well, when it says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, but Noah was perfect in his generations.
Right.
Everybody needs grace. Noah was not a perfect man,
right,
but he was genetically
clean.
That's right.
And think about the patience of God. He waited until there was only one family that was left unblemished.
And you talk in your book, and it's such a great area of your book. You talk about the patience of God.
It's amazing.
When I read it in your book, I had never thought about that, but he is so extremely patient.
He is not in a rush to judge anybody.
Right.
But you know, Jimmy, when I went to the lower mountains of Ararat, now I've been there multiple times. I've spent a lot of time there because when you see the ruins of Noah's Ark, you just don't want to leave. You want to stay there and really ponder. Yeah. That ship was enormous, especially when you come from the lower end, from the stern of the ship. It is so enormous that it's overwhelming. And the edge of the ship is so well preserved that you can follow the sides of the ship all the way up to the very bow of the ship, and the bow of the ship is pointed. Now, some people today speculate that it was like a big barge. It was not. It was exactly the shape of an ancient ship.
Wow.
And they have done core drilling into the sides of it now. They've pulled out animal things. They've pulled out actually human things from the inside of
Really?
it. They've done all kinds of scans, ERT scans, ground penetrating radar. And you can now see right angles. You can see rooms, 3 levels. And the very most recent analysis shows a central corridor that goes right through the center of the ship, and a part of it is still vacated. Is that amazing?
It's amazing, totally amazing.
But it landed higher. It landed up on the border of what today is Iran. That up high was called the place of the landing. And then over all these years, it's come down the side of the mountain because that's a mud field. And in fact, when you go there today, I said to my wife, be sure to wear shoes that you can ruin because you are going to ruin your shoes. It's mud from the flood. And that boat literally came down the side of that mountain and finally came to rest where it is today.
You say in your book here, this is chapter 5, what ancient sources said about fallen angels and giants, and you go into Clement of Rome, Josephus,
Irenaeus, Athenagoras, Tertullian, all of them wrote about it.
Yeah.
They wrote about the ark, they wrote about the giants, they wrote about the angels metamorphosing, taking on a different form so they could have sex with women.
Yeah.
When you read about it, all these ancient voices wrote in unison about the same event. And it was firmly believed until the time of Augustine. And during the time of Augustine, they were trying to throw off all the supernatural entanglements of paganism. And so Augustine brought a new doctrine that the sons of men were the seed of Seth. And that's where the Sethite theory began. And it's impossible that it's the seed of Seth. Why would the seed of Seth, the sons of God, that's what he said, why would they suddenly begin to produce giants? They would not. And I cover in this book why it cannot be the sons of Seth.
So you believe the angels returned, the fallen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There was an incursion which occurred before the flood. And the Bible tells us those angels, we read this in Peter and in Jude, God has put into prison. Now this is amazing. The word that is used there in Peter is the word Tartarus. The word Tartarus is borrowed from mythology.
Wow.
It's an underground abyss where rebellious spirits are held. And Peter says they're going to be held there until the day of judgment. And guess what? The word judgment in Greek is the word crisis. That's literally the word.
Wow.
Which means for those angels, it will be the greatest crisis imaginable. Jude writes about it, says they've been imprisoned, they've been incarcerated. But it appears there was a second incursion after the flood. Now, I say it appears because the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us that, but there was the appearance of giants again after the flood. It happened again. Now here's my question for you.
Okay.
Jesus said whatever was happening before the flood is going to be replicated again at the end of the age.
Well, this is something, and I've had several guests on to talk about that, the hybrid race.
Right.
So I'll answer it and I'll throw it back to you. The UFO phenomenon is very real.
It is.
And it's been documented. Dr. Hugh Ross, who is an astrophysicist and a very strong Christian, proves just physically it would be impossible. Intergalactic travel is impossible. He said you could never take a physical spaceship through all of the dust in the universe. It could never make it here. These are not intergalactic, they're interdimensional.
They're interdimensional, that's right.
And so when people are abducted, and this has been going on for centuries, and cultures all over the world, no believers are abducted. It's only unbelievers. And many of them go through sexual experimentation. And this is Dr. John Mack, who is a psychiatrist with Harvard University. He wrote a book on it called Abducted, and he was scorned by his peers for doing that. And he said, after meeting with people who are abducted, I'm convinced they're not mentally ill, that they're actually recounting an actual experience that they had, because it's the same experience over and over. They don't want attention. They don't have any other manifestations of mental instability or whatever. And so they're saying they were abducted, they went into these spaceships, that they had sexual experimentation or whatever. And so I believe it's demonic. I believe you agree with that.
I do.
That it's deception. And this is another thing I say, Rick. Imagine that the rapture happens right now. And the next thing that happens is there's a UFO over New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, London, Moscow. Which gets more attention?
Right.
Okay. And so the Vatican has been studying UFOs for a long time. They have an observatory on Mount Graham in Arizona. They have a infrared telescope called Lucifer that they're watching something come. This is what they're saying. Late Tom Horn was a guest on my show, and he wrote a book on this. And they said, we're watching something come. And when it comes, we're prepared to change our theology. And they may be baptizing us rather than us baptizing them. And on Mount Graham, and Tom writes about this in his book, he was there with the Jesuits who run Mount Graham, and they talk about all the UFOs. They're always seeing all these UFOs up there. Well, there are more people in Europe that believe in UFOs than God. The UFO phenomenon, because of movies, beginning with The Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all these different movies, and the movies today are so realistic that people are conditioned.
They are.
And so I believe that the hybrids very well could be either the offspring of the sexual experimentation that the demons have been doing with people. You go right back to fallen angels.
Yeah, you do.
So I don't know if they're here among us. I don't know if they're going to show up. L.A. Marzulli was on the show.
Don't you like him?
I love him. He's fascinating. And he said what he believes, and I believe that Billy Crone also said the same thing. They believe when we go up, they come down. That when the rapture happens, they're coming down.
Well, you use the word abduction. Well, if you go to Genesis 6, it says that the sons of God took wives of all that they chose. I think they were like abductions. And that's when that mingling of seed began to take place. And it seems to me, in Luke 21:11, Jesus made a statement which scholars have not known how to interpret. Greek translators have never translated correctly because it is so strange. And Jesus said, in addition to earthquakes and wars and famines and all these things, there'll be great signs from the heavens and fearful sights. Well, when you read that in the Greek text, there's a little preposition apo, which means from, but the way that it is used in the text literally means there will be the great or multiple appearances of things descending from the heavens.
There you go.
That's literally what it says. And then it says fearful sights. The Greek word phobotron, which is the derivative of phobos, which means fear, but when the word phobos becomes phobotron, that word was only used one way, and anybody who's really an expert in Greek knows this. But the translators didn't know what to do with it because it is the Greek word for monsters. It is the word monsters. So if you take those two statements together, Jesus said at the very end of the age, there will be great, and the Greek here refers to a multiplicity of experiences, things descending apo directly from the heavens, and connected with that, there will be the appearance of monsters. And of course, translators haven't known what to do with that. But we're really living in the day when people are seeing things come out of the heavens. And by the way, we're already seeing monstrous things.
Yes.
And I don't want to offend anybody, but you know what? We're living in a day when just go walk through the mall or the airport, you don't know who you're looking at. I mean, it's like we're living in a world of monsters.
Yeah.
People that have altered their bodies, the world before the flood was a trans world. When all these hybrid creatures were being created, now we have transhumanism, which you guys cover so well in your conferences.
Big issue.
We've got transgenderism. Trans is the big word.
Yeah.
And you know what? Nutty has only begun. It's going to get more bizarre as we come to the end of the age. And I'm going to say a word about the rapture.
Okay.
In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul talks about the rapture. And people say, oh, the word rapture is not in the Bible. No, it's not. The word rapture is from the Vulgate translation, translated by Jerome, from the Greek word harpazo.
Right.
But the word harpazo means to seize. But the way that word harpazo is used, it always means to snatch out of danger just in the nick of time. It is always a rescue operation, which implies the rapture of the church may occur in a very dark moment.
So you're pre-trib.
I'm pre-trib.
So you believe that Jesus is going to come for the church before the tribulation begins?
I do, but I believe it might get so dark
Yeah.
The people might feel like they're in the tribulation.
And that honestly is an encouraging word, because we get a lot of people that are just very discouraged. It's overwhelming.
It is.
You look at Israel, you look at America, you look at the world and what's happening in the world.
Right.
And it's Jesus said that there would be distress upon the earth with perplexity.
That's right.
And perplexity, I don't know what the Greek word is, but it means there's no answer.
Right.
You just can't find the answer. And that's what's happening in the world. The problems that we have, there's just no answers. And they just keep getting worse. And I don't, when I studied about the rapture and about the end times when I was in my 20s and 30s, I got saved in 1973. So it was Pollyanna compared to the day. And David Wilkerson in 1983, I was in college. 1973, I was in college, and he came out with a book called The Vision.
I remember when it came out, people laughed at that book.
Yes, and we had a Bible study, and someone brought in a cassette tape back in the days of cassette tapes and played his sermon on the vision. Well, first of all, it scared you to death.
He talked about sex on TV, homosexuals on TV. People said, "Oh, that'll never happen." He really took a lot of heat.
I mean, when he said it, well, first of all, it was so credible. I mean, it just was anointed the way he did it.
It was.
Well, it's come true.
Yeah, every word of that vision has come true.
Every word. We thought it was going to happen in 5 or 10 years. He said there'll be R-rated movies on primetime TV, and I thought, that could never happen. Well, it happened.
It is.
And a lot more.
It has.
So it was, what we're seeing today is the world of the end. And your book does such a fantastic job of, your subtitle here, how the events of Noah's Ark and the flood are relevant to the end of the age. The more I read the Bible, the more I realize it all goes back to Genesis. The Michael Heiser, we were talking about him earlier, Dr. Michael Heiser, he passed away, but he wrote a book called Reversing Hermon. Now, Hermon means oath. And Enoch talks about the angels that came down on Mount Hermon.
Now, in Greek mythology, it's on Mount Olympus. It all happens on a mountain, but it starts on Hermon.
Starts on Hermon. And they made an oath. The fallen angels made an oath.
200 of them.
200. Well, and that talks about the second incursion. You could have one incursion, you had plenty of angels, and they made an oath on Mount Hermon to populate the earth with human women. Now, the interesting thing is, when the children of Israel came into the promised land, and they said, we're like grasshoppers in comparison to these people, it was at the base of Mount Hermon. I mean, Israel is at the base of Mount Hermon. And so they're coming into the land around Mount Hermon, and they're seeing the Nephilim, they're seeing all these people. It terrified them. David killed Goliath. Mm-hmm. He was one of them.
He was.
And all of them. So the Bible, so what we're talking about on the show today is not something that happened back around Noah's day. It's something that happened in Noah's day that continues to happen today. And exactly like you said, as it was in the days of Noah, that was a very important time, it's going to be happening again. Now you have violence. We have a world of violence. You have immorality.
They had world population boom.
World population boom.
They had evil continually in the heart of man. Oh my goodness, the section I did on that in this book about how evil today, all kinds of new inventions of evil, sex toys, sex robots.
Right.
I mean, what man has done, I mean, we're violating so many things in the same way there were violations before the flood.
It's off the charts. So we're going to come back next week. Rick, you're going to join me again next week. And we're just now getting, honestly, we're just barely into the book. And so we're going to continue to talk about Rick's book. Thank you for joining me today.
It's good to be with you.
And we'll be back again next week. Thank you for joining us for today's show. Now we're going to go right now into the subscriber-only portion. And I'm talking to Brian Schrauger, our correspondent in Israel. And we're talking about the 6 hostages that were just now murdered by Hamas. And there's an upheaval in Israel politically, militarily, and also it's just a firestorm in the world that's been set off by this. We're going to be talking about what's happening in Israel right now in real time. So I want you to stay tuned for that. This is the subscriber-only portion of the show. If you're not a subscriber, go to endtimes.com. You can become a subscriber for $7 a month. You can watch the entire Tipping Point show. And we have podcasts all through the week by Brian Schrauger, Dr. Mark Hitchcock, myself. We have articles. We have all kinds of information that comes out, breaking news. I would love for you to be a subscriber. Go to endtimes.com right now and become a subscriber for $7 a month. If you are a subscriber, stay tuned. I'm going to be coming right back with Brian Schrauger.